The hot Memphis sun beat down on the crowd, making the air shimmer. It was late spring 1957, and the buzz wasn't just from the heat. It was from the palpable excitement that hummed through every single person pressed against the barrier ropes. Today, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was making a rare public appearance at the Overton Park Shell, a benefit for a local charity. Not a full concert, just a greeting, a few words, maybe a song or two. If the crowd got lucky, but for everyone here, that was more than enough. Elsie Mae Thompson, 17 years old, and feeling every bit of her youth and nervousness, gripped the rough rope in front of her. Her palms were sweaty, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She'd ridden the bus all the way from her small, quiet town outside of Memphis, saving up every dime from her after-school job at the soda fountain. Her mother had said it was foolish, chasing after a boy with greasy hair and no manners. But Elsie didn't care. Her mother didn't understand. No one in her town did. Elvis wasn't just a boy with greasy hair. He was a force of nature. A voice that soared and dipped and twisted, awakening something inside Elsie she hadn't known existed. In her quiet life, filled with chores and expectations, Elvis's music was a secret world of rebellion and freedom. When she put on one of his records, the world faded away, and she was dancing alive. A girl who wasn't afraid of anything. He understood her, even though they'd never met. His songs were like letters, written just for her, telling her it was okay to feel, to dream, to be different. She'd arrived hours ago, securing a spot right at the front, directly where the car was expected to pull up. The crowd around her was a kaleidoscope of faces, screaming teenagers with rolled-up jeans and bobby socks, older women with determined expressions, even a few bewildered fathers dragged along by their daughters. Every few minutes a ripple of excitement would pass through the throng. A false alarm and then the collective sigh of disappointment, but the energy never dipped. It just kept building like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Elsie wasn't usually the type to push or scream. She was quiet, observant, more likely to fade into the background. But today was different. Today she felt a strange, desperate courage bubbling inside her. She needed to see him, really see him. Not just on her record cover or in a grainy newspaper photo, but in person. To feel the same air he breathed, to be part of the magic. She thought about what she would say if she got the chance. "Mr. Presley, your music, it means so much to me." But the words seemed too small, too ordinary for the extraordinary feeling he inspired. What could she possibly say that would convey the depth of her gratitude? The way his voice had pulled her out of quiet despair more times than she could count. Her eyes scanned the street, squinting against the bright sun. A few police officers on motorcycles were trying to keep a path clear, but it was a losing battle. Crowd swelled, pushing forward, eager, hungry for a glimpse. Elsie felt herself being pressed tighter against the barrier, the metal digging into her stomach. She didn't mind. The discomfort was a small price to pay. A sudden, sustained roar erupted from down the street. It was a different kind of roar this time, deeper, more primal. It wasn't a false alarm, this was it. Elsie's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the vibration of the sound through the ground, through the very bones of the people around her. It was the sound of a legend arriving. A sleek black car, long and gleaming, slowly inched its way through the human wall. The windows were tinted, but Elsie could make out the faint silhouette of someone inside. Her heart pounded harder, a frantic drumbeat demanding attention. This was the moment she had been waiting for, hoping for, dreaming of. This was her chance to feel truly alive. And for a fleeting wild second, a desperate unspoken thought formed in her mind, a reckless desire to somehow, against all odds, make this moment unforgettable. Not just for her, but for him. The crowd surged, a living wave of adoration. Elsie felt herself lifted slightly off her feet, carried by the sheer force of collective excitement. She tightened her grip on the rope, digging her heels into the ground, determined not to lose her precious spot. The roar intensified, a deafening wave of sound that washed over everything. Elsie strained on her tiptoes, trying to see over the bobbing heads. The black car was closer now, moving at a snail's pace. She could just about make out the gleam of chrome, the reflection of the sun on its polished surface, and then slowly, a window began to slide down. A collective gasp, then an even louder shriek. His black hair, perfectly coiffed, shone like a raven's wing in the sunlight. His profile was even more striking in person, sharp and defined, and when he turned his head, his eyes, a startling blue, seemed to hold a warmth that cut through the chaos. He offered a shy, almost humble smile, then a wave. It was a simple gesture, but it sent another tremor through the crowd. Girls around Elsie started crying, some shouting his name, their voices hoarse with emotion. Elsie felt a lump form in her throat. He was truly magnificent. Security guards, burly men with stern faces, moved in a tight formation around the car, trying to create a small bubble of space. But it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a teacup. The fans pressed in, hands outstretched, desperate to touch him, to get an autograph, to simply be acknowledged. Elvis, despite the overwhelming crush, handled it with a kind of quiet grace. He leaned forward, shaking a few hands, offering a smile here, a nod there. His movements were fluid, almost practiced, yet they still felt genuine. He didn't seem annoyed or overwhelmed, just present. He met gazes, even if only for a second, and in that fleeting connection, Elsie felt a warmth spread through her chest. He was moving down the line, closer and closer to Elsie's spot. Each step of the car, each moment he spent greeting another fan, felt like an eternity. Elsie's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst to her ribs. Her vision narrowed, focusing only on him, the way the light caught his hair, the faint smile playing on his lips. She noticed a small gap in the security line just ahead of her. A lucky break. As she just leaned in, just reached out, what if she could touch him? Not just his hand like everyone else. Something more? Something that would set her apart. Something memorable. The desperation she'd felt earlier, the yearning to be seen, to be part of his world, swelled to an almost unbearable pitch. She wasn't thinking clearly. Logic and reason had abandoned her the moment he had stepped into her line of sight. All that mattered was this instant, this fleeting opportunity. His face was directly in front of her now, only a few feet away. His eyes, incredibly blue, flickered towards her, not lingering, but still, she felt seen. It was too much. The energy, the proximity, the feeling of her entire life leading up to this one singular moment. Without thinking, driven by an impulse she couldn't control, Elsie shifted her weight. Her hand, trembling, shot out. It wasn't a grab for his arm or his jacket. It was something more daring, more iconic, something that screamed Elvis to her, something that felt like the essence of him. Her fingers closed around a lock of his hair. It was softer than she expected, silky yet firm, held in place by what felt like a mountain of pomade. For a split second, she felt a profound, almost electric connection. This was it. She had done it. She had touched Elvis Presley's hair. The world seemed to hold its breath. The instant Elsie's fingers closed around the thick lock of Elvis's hair, a profound stillness descended. It was as if the roaring crowd, the blaring car horns, the distant city sounds, all suddenly went silent. In that frozen moment, only the frantic pounding of Elsie's own heart echoed in her ears. Elvis froze too. His smile, which had been so warm and easy, faltered. His head, which had been turned slightly towards another fan, became utterly still. His eyes, just a second ago twinkling with good humor, widened, almost imperceptibly. As they fixed on Elsie, there was no anger there, no harshness, just a surprising quiet moment of absolute stillness. Elsie herself was shocked. The impulse had been so sudden, so overwhelming, that the reality of what she had done crashed over her in a painful wave. Her fingers were still tangled in his hair, and she could feel the texture, the firmness. It was real, too real. Then the world seemed to snap back into motion, but in slow motion, a gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity of the crowd. It wasn't a scream of excitement. It was a collective intake of breath, a sound of shock and disbelief. Security guards who had been on high alert reacted in unison. Two large men in dark suits surged forward, their faces hardening, their hands reaching for Elsie. But before they could truly intervene, Elvis moved. It wasn't a jerking away or a violent pull. His head remained still. Instead, his right hand, strong and surprisingly gentle, rose and covered Elsie's hand that was still clutched in his hair. His fingers were warm against her cold one. His voice, though quiet, cut through the reawakened murmur of the crowd. It was calm, firm, and possessed a surprising authority that silenced everyone within earshot. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble barely above a whisper, yet resonating with conviction. "Please." He didn't need to say more. The single word, the quiet plea, the steady gaze, the gentle pressure of his hand over hers. It was enough. Elsie felt a jolt, not of fear, but of profound shame. The electricity she'd felt a moment ago was replaced by a crushing wave of humiliation. She immediately loosened her grip. Her fingers, which had clung so stubbornly, now trembled as she pulled them away from his hair. Elvis's hand remained over hers for another beat, a comforting weight, before he slowly, deliberately removed. His eyes, still fixed on hers, seemed to hold a mixture of understanding and disappointment. Not anger, just disappointment. The security guards, momentarily paused by Elvis's intervention, now moved in. One of them, a man with a square jaw and watchful eyes, took Elsie gently but firmly by the arm. "All right, miss, let's go." Elsie didn't resist. She couldn't. Her head hung low, her eyes fixed on the ground, burning with tears. She refused to let fall. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her, the whispers, the judgmental stares. She was no longer an anonymous girl in the crowd. She was the girl who had grabbed Elvis Presley's hair, the girl who had overstepped, who had broken the unspoken rule of respect. As the security guard led her away through the parting sea of onlookers, Elsie risked one quick glance back. Elvis was already turning away his face, still calm as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. He offered a small, reassuring smile to the fans nearby, a silent message that everything was all right. But Elsie knew deep down that for her everything had just changed. The dream she had been chasing had shattered into a million pieces, and she was left with nothing but the stinging dust of regret. Elsie was led away from the barrier, not roughly, but with a firm, undeniable authority. The security guard, a burly man named Red, kept a hand on her arm, guiding her through the thinning crowd and towards a less chaotic section near the back of the venue. The whispers followed her like a cruel shadow. "Did you see that?" Grabbed his hair, plain as day. Some people got no respect. Her face was still burning, and she kept her head down, wanting nothing more than for the ground to open up and swallow her whole. The thrill of being close to Elvis, the desperate need to connect a knot of shame in her stomach. What had she been thinking? It had been such a stupid, impulsive thing to do. She wasn't like that. She was quiet, polite. But the moment, the sheer overwhelming presence of him, had made her act in a way she didn't recognize. Red led her to a small, enclosed area, normally used for equipment storage, and gestured for her to sit on a metal crate. "Stay here, miss," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Just need to get your information. Make sure you're not planning anything else." Elsie nodded numbly, too mortified to speak. He hadn't been angry. He hadn't yelled or recoiled in disgust. He had shown her a dignity she certainly hadn't shown him, and that was what stung the most. His grace had highlighted her own desperate, ungraceful act. She had wanted to be memorable, yes, but not like this. She imagined the stories that would be told. Remember the girl who grabbed Elvis's hair? What a maniac. Her secret, desperate admiration had turned into public humiliation. She had dreamed of a magical connection, and instead she had crossed a line, violated his space, and made him uncomfortable. Meanwhile, behind the curtain of the stage, away from the prying eyes of the crowd, the small incident was already being discussed. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, a shrewd man who rarely missed a beat, was already speaking to the security chief. "Everything all right, son?" the colonel asked Elvis, his voice a low rumble. He hadn't seen the exact moment, but the sudden shift in the crowd's energy had alerted him. Elvis ran a hand through his hair, smoothing down the disturbed lock. He didn't seem flustered, but there was a thoughtful, almost wistful look in his eyes. "Yeah, Colonel, just a bit of a zealous fan." He gave a small wry smile. "Got a good at Chief Joe," stepped forward. "We've got her, Mr. Presley, just taking down her details. She didn't seem violent, just overwhelmed." Elvis nodded. "That's what I figured. She looked scared after. Didn't seem like she meant any harm." He paused, then added, his voice serious. "Just make sure she's treated right, Joe. No rough stuff. She was just caught up." Colonel raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his shrewd eyes. Most stars would be demanding stricter security, maybe even a public denouncement. But Elvis, as always, was different. "She got a name, Joe?" Elvis asked, his gaze distant as if seeing Elsie's face again. "Elsie Mae Thompson, sir, from outside of town," Joe replied. Having just received the information from Red, Elsie Mae Thompson, the name hung in the air. Elvis didn't say anything more, but he continued to look thoughtful. He understood the frenzy, the adoration that could sometimes spill over into something intense and misguided. He felt it every day, but he also understood the fine line between adoration and invasion. And in Elsie's eyes, in that brief locked moment, he hadn't seen malice. He'd seen something akin to desperation, and that, he realized, made her not a threat, but just another human being caught in the whirlwind of his fame. Elvis found himself alone in his dressing room, back to the vibrant roar of the crowd still echoing faintly, but now muted by the thick walls. He sat on a plush sofa, one hand instinctively reaching up to smooth his hair, feeling for the spot where Elsie's fingers had been. It wasn't sore, not physically, but a strange sensation lingered, a faint phantom touch that spoke of the encounter. He leaned back, closing his eyes. The memory of Elsie's face came clearly to mind, her wide, almost desperate eyes, the sudden flush of shame that had spread across her cheeks. He'd seen that look before many times in the faces of fans who were so overwhelmed they didn't quite know what to do with all that emotion, but this time it had been different. A physical crossing of a boundary, yes, but her reaction, the immediate mortification, had told him more than words ever could. "She didn't mean it," he murmured to himself. The words almost a question. He genuinely believed it. There was a raw, unthinking quality to her grab, not a malicious one. It was the desperate act of someone reaching for a dream and perhaps misjudging how to hold it. His inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, as they jokingly called themselves, were bustling around in the outer room, talking quietly. Scotty Moore and Bill Black were probably tuning their instruments, getting ready for a potential impromptu jam, or just for the ride home. DJ Fontana would be tapping his drumsticks, itching to play. Colonel Parker would be on the phone already, spinning the narrative, ensuring the media understood. This was just a minor incident, quickly handled. Elvis knew the drill. He knew the risks. He lived in a constant state of adoration, and sometimes that adoration could feel like a cage. He loved his fans, truly. He felt a deep connection to them, a sense of gratitude that they had given him this incredible life. But there were moments like today when the intensity of it all could be suffocating, when the lines blurred between the performer and the man, when his personal space felt like public property. He opened his eyes, staring at his reflection in a large mirror. The famous pompadour was still intact. The quiff, majestic. It was more than just hair. It was a symbol, instantly recognizable, a part of the persona, and Elsie had reached for that symbol. He thought about his own roots, his humble beginnings. He remembered the feeling of wanting something so badly. It ached a hunger for something more than what life seemed to offer. He wondered what Elsie Mae Thompson's life was like. Was she just a regular girl caught up in the rock and roll craze? Or was there something deeper, something she was trying to escape or reach for just as he had? A knock on the door. It was Joe Esposito, his friend and trusted security chief. "Yeah, Joe, I'm fine," Elvis confirmed. "What about the girl?" "Elsie Mae." "Is she okay? Has she left?" "She's still here. Red's with her. She's pretty upset by the looks of it. Crying almost, said she's sorry 100 times." Elvis sat up straighter. Upset, huh? He thought for a moment. Most people, if they pulled something like that, would be defiant or try to run. Her genuine distress spoke volumes. "Joe," Elvis began, a new idea forming in his mind. Something outside of the usual protocol. Do you think she'd be willing to talk just for a minute? No more security, just me, and maybe you. If it makes her feel safer." Joe's eyebrows shot up. "Talk? You mean you want to see her again after what she did?" There was a hint of surprise and perhaps apprehension in his voice. It wasn't typical to engage with a fan who had crossed such a line. "She looked so ashamed," Joe Elvis explained, his voice gentle but firm. "And she didn't hurt me. I got a feeling about her. I think she's just a lost kid, really. She needs to know it's all right. That I understand. He didn't want her to carry this shame, this regret. He wanted her to understand that even in the whirlwind of his life, there was room for grace, for understanding, for human connection. He wanted to show her that true strength wasn't in retaliation, but in empathy." Joe looked at Elvis for a long moment, seeing the genuine compassion in his friend's eyes. He knew Elvis was different, that his heart was always open. "All right, I'll go ask Red to bring her around. Just give her a minute to compose herself." Elvis nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn a moment of boundary crossing into a moment of understanding. A small act, perhaps, but one that could make all the difference to a girl named Elsie Mae Thompson. Elsie sat on the metal crate, a lump of misery in her throat. The echoes of the crowd outside seemed to mock her, their shouts of adoration for Elvis a stark contrast to her own humiliation. She kept picturing his face, that calm, disappointed look, and the memory twisted in her gut. She'd always prided herself on being respectful, on having manners, and now she was the girl who had acted like a wild animal. She heard footsteps approach, and looked up, her heart sinking. She expected more questions, maybe a lecture. Disbelief warred with a fresh wave of fear. Was this it? Was he going to yell at her to make an example of her? Her stomach twisted into tighter knots. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Joe offered a small. "He just wants to make sure you're all right, and that you understand." Understand what? That she was a crazy fan who couldn't control herself. Elsie swallowed hard, her palms suddenly clammy. The thought of facing him again after what she'd done was terrifying, but also a tiny spark of hope flickered. If he wanted to talk, perhaps he wasn't as angry as she deserved. "Okay," she managed, pushing herself up from the crate. Her legs felt wobbly. Joe led her through a maze of corridors, past bustling stagehands and musicians. The air backstage smelled of dust, sweat, and something vaguely metallic. Finally, he stopped at a door, knocked once, and pushed it open. "She's here, E." Elsie stepped hesitantly into the room. It wasn't a grand, luxurious space, just a simple dressing room. And there, sitting on a sofa, looking surprisingly relaxed, despite the chaos outside, was Elvis Presley. He wasn't in his flashy stage clothes, but a simple shirt and trousers. He looked human, real. He rose as she entered, a gentle smile gracing his lips. His blue eyes, which had held disappointment earlier, now held a quiet understanding. "Elsie Mae," he said. His voice soft, almost melodic, he extended a hand not to shake, but as an invitation. "Please, come in. Have a seat." Elsie felt her cheeks flush again, but she managed to take a few hesitant steps inside. Joe remained by the door, a silent, watchful presence. I'm so sorry, Mr. Presley," Elsie blurted out the apology, tumbling out of her before she could stop it. Her voice trembled. "I don't know what came over me. It was so stupid. I'm truly, truly sorry." Tears finally welled up, blurring her vision. Elvis walked closer, and to her surprise, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, comforting. "It's all right, Elsie Mae," he said, his voice a balm to her raw nerves. "Really, I understand." He guided her to a chair and waited until she sat before taking his seat again. "Sometimes," he continued, leaning forward slightly, his gaze steady and sincere, "the feeling just gets too big, doesn't it? When you admire someone so much, and you're suddenly right there, and all those emotions just spill over." Elsie nodded, tears now streaming down her face. No longer fighting them, he understood. He truly understood. I didn't mean to hurt you or make you uncomfortable," she stammered, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Your music, it means everything to me. It makes me feel brave. I just wanted to be close to show you how much." He listened patiently, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he took a deep breath. "I know, Elsie Mae." He paused, then picked up a small framed photo from a nearby table, a picture of him as a child, grinning widely. He held it for a moment and looked back at her. "Fame's a strange thing," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's a blessing, don't get me wrong. I'm thankful for every single person out there, but sometimes, it's hard to remember there's a real person here too, just a regular fella, doing his best," he gestured to himself. "And I need my space just like anyone else, just like you need yours." He wasn't scolding her, he was explaining. He was treating her not as a frantic fan who had crossed a line, but as an equal, a human being worthy of understanding. He was talking about boundaries, about respect, not with anger, but with empathy. And in that moment, Elsie realized the true depth of his grace. He wasn't just a superstar. He was a kind and gentle soul, capable of turning an embarrassing incident into a profound lesson. Elsie sat spellbound, listening to Elvis speak. He wasn't a dazzling performer on a stage now, nor was he the untouchable idol she'd created in her mind. He was just a man speaking simply, honestly about his own experiences with fame. And in his words, Elsie found not just forgiveness, but a deep, unexpected validation. "It's a balancing act, you see," Elvis continued, his gaze thoughtful. "I want to be close to my fans, want to thank them for their support, but there's a line, a little invisible line that helps everyone feel safe and respected. And sometimes in the excitement, it's easy to step over it without meaning. I know you didn't mean any harm, Elsie Mae. I truly believe that." His understanding washed over her like a warm wave, melting away the last vestiges of her shame. He hadn't judged her. He hadn't dismissed her. He had seen past her impulsive act to the raw emotion beneath it. And in doing so, he had shown her a profound respect that she hadn't deserved. "Thank you, Mr. Presley," Elsie whispered, her voice still a little shaky but filled with genuine gratitude. I really am sorry. I won't ever do anything like that again, I promise." He smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that reached his eyes. "I know you won't, and please call me Elvis or E if you like. Mr. Presley makes me feel like my daddy." A faint chuckle escaped him, and Elsie couldn't help but smile too. A real smile, for the first time since the incident. He paused, then picked up a small blank autograph card from the table. "Now, before you go, I want to give you something, not just an apology from me for the scare, but a reminder of, well, of what we just talked about." He took a pen and began to write. Elsie watched, mesmerized, as his hand moved across the card. He signed his famous looping signature, then added a few more words underneath. When he finished, he handed it to her. Elsie took the card with trembling hands on it, in bold, confident script. It read, "To Elsie Mae, keep your heart open, but respect your boundaries. And others with understanding, Elvis Presley." Her eyes welled up again, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude and awe. This wasn't just an autograph. It was a personal message, a profound lesson, etched into a simple card. He wasn't just signing his name, he was imparting wisdom, turning a moment of chaos into a moment of teaching. "You know," Elvis said, as if sensing the depth of her emotion, "true admiration, the kind that lasts, it isn't about trying to grab a piece of something. It's about letting the music, the art, the person. She had been so desperate to physically touch him, to possess a piece of him, that she had forgotten the true power of his music, which was meant to inspire, not to be owned. She had sought external validation when the real power lay in her own ability to create, to dream, to be strong. "Thank you, Elvis," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything, for the music, and for this." She gestured to the card, but more importantly, to the feeling in her heart. He smiled again. That genuine, kind smile. "You take care, Elsie Mae, and remember what we talked about." Joe stepped forward, gently indicating it was time to go. Elsie rose, feeling lighter, profoundly changed. As she turned to leave, she risked one last glance back at Elvis. He gave a small nod, a silent farewell. Walking out of that room through the backstage corridors, Elsie felt like a different person. The shame was gone, replaced by a deep sense of respect. Not just for Elvis, but for herself. She had made a mistake, a big one. But Elvis, with his extraordinary grace, had not only forgiven her, but had also given her a lesson that would stay with her for a lifetime. A lesson about boundaries, about respect, and about the true, lasting power of kindness. The bus ride home felt different. Elsie clutched the signed card, the words, "Keep your heart open, but respect your boundaries." And others, feeling like a newly discovered truth, the rhythmic hum of the engine, which usually lulled her into a daydream, now seemed to vibrate with a new understanding. She replayed the entire encounter in her mind, from the moment of her impulsive grab to Elvis's calm response, his gentle hand, and finally their quiet conversation backed. She realized how easily it could have gone differently. He could have reacted with anger, had her arrested or publicly shamed, but he hadn't. He had chosen grace. He had chosen to see her not as a threat, but as a young woman caught in an overwhelming moment. That act of understanding, that profound kindness from someone so famous, so adored, had shifted something deep inside Elsie. For so long she had felt invisible in her small town, overshadowed by her stricter older sister or dismissed by her parents, who saw her as merely quiet. Elvis's music had given her an escape, a fantasy. But Elvis, the man, had given her something far more valuable, a sense of being seen, truly seen, and treated with dignity even when she had shown none. The desperate yearning to touch him, to possess a piece of his magic, now seemed childish, almost embarrassing. She understood now that true connection wasn't about physical proximity or taking something. It was about mutual respect, about understanding, and about the invisible threads of inspiration that linked people together. His music still soared in her heart, but now it was clearer, more resonant, stripped of the frantic need she'd felt before. When she arrived home, her mother barely looked up from her sewing. "You're late, Elsie Mae, and your hair's a mess. Did you at least get one of those picture things?" Elsie simply shook her head. "No, Mama, but I got something better." She didn't show the card. This was personal. This was for her. Over the next few weeks, a subtle but significant change began to take root in Elsie. She was still quiet, but there was a new steadiness in her eyes. She started drawing again, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago. Instead of just copying figures from magazines, she began sketching faces from her imagination, trying to capture the subtle emotions she'd witnessed that day. She even started writing small poems, trying to express the complex feelings of awe, regret, and newfound understanding. She realized that the energy she had poured into desperately chasing a fleeting moment of contact with Elvis could be channeled into something constructive, something that allowed her to express her own inner world. Elvis had shown her that her own feelings, her own passions were valid, and that true strength came from within, from honoring oneself and others. One evening, weeks later, a letter arrived at the General Delivery Post Office, addressed simply to Elvis Presley, Memphis, TN. It was a short, heartfelt letter written in Elsie's neat, flowing hand. She didn't apologize again. She simply expressed her profound gratitude for his kindness and understanding. That day, she told him how his words had helped her see things differently, how she was finding new ways to express herself. She didn't ask for a reply or anything at all. It was simply an act of profound respect. A quiet acknowledgement of the grace he had shown her. She sealed the envelope, affixed a stamp, and dropped it into the mailbox. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of his life. But for Elsie, it was an important act of closure, a testament to the growth she had experienced. She had come to Memphis seeking an idol, and she had found a lesson in humanity. She had come seeking to grasp, and she had left learning to respect. And that, she knew, was a far greater gift than any souvenir. Elsie's letter arrived at Graceland amidst a mountain of fan mail, telegrams, and gifts. It was one of thousands, but Joe Esposito, still a watchful gatekeeper, recognized the name Elsie Mae Thompson. He remembered the incident, the girl's profound shame and Elvis's unusual request to speak with her. He set the letter aside, knowing Elvis often liked to read a few letters himself, especially those that seemed to have a personal touch. A few days later, Elvis sat in his study, flipping through a stack of fan mail, occasionally chuckling at a particularly bold declaration of love or a hand-drawn portrait. He picked up Elsie's letter. He read it once. Then again, his brow furrowed in thought. A small, he called out, not looking up from the letter. Sometimes a little understanding can go a long way, huh? Joe nodded a quiet agreement. He remembered Elvis's calm demeanor during the incident, the gentle correction, the decision to speak to her, instead of having her removed forcefully. It wasn't the way most stars would have handled it. But then, Elvis was never most stars. The incident with Elsie Mae, though small in the grand narrative of Elvis's colossal career, became a quiet anecdote among his closest confidants. It was a story shared not to highlight a fan's misstep, but to exemplify Elvis's character. "He's got a heart of gold," that one Joe would sometimes say, recalling the incident. "Even when someone steps out of line, he sees the human underneath." For Elvis, it was a subtle reminder of the profound impact he had on individual lives beyond the roaring crowds and the screening headlines. He carried the understanding that while he was a symbol, a king, he was also a person. And his actions, even small ones, resonated with people in deeply personal ways. Continued to grapple with the pressures of fame, the constant invasion of privacy, but he always tried to meet it with the grace he had learned from his mother, from his faith, and from his own humble beginnings. Years passed. Elvis's fame grew, reaching heights no one could have imagined. His concerts became legendary, his films blockbuster hits. There were more crowds, more hands reaching, more moments of intense adoration. But he continued to handle it with that same calm demeanor, that underlying current of respect. He was the king, yes, but he never forgot where he came from or the humanity of the people who adored him and Elsie Mae Thompson. She never became famous, never stood on a stage, but her life blossomed in its own quiet way. She went to college, something she might never have considered if not for that broad encounter. She studied art and writing, channeling her once frantic energy into creative expression. She became a teacher, inspiring young minds with the same patience and understanding that had been shown to her. She kept the signed card from Elvis, tucked away in a special box, with other cherished mementos. Occasionally, when faced with a difficult student or a challenging situation, she would take it out and reread the words, "Keep your heart open, but respect your boundaries." And others, it was a simple message but profound. It reminded her that kindness was a powerful force, that understanding could disarm anger, and that grace was the most beautiful response to almost any situation. Elsie never saw Elvis again in person, but his music remained a constant in her life. Appreciated now with a deeper, more mature understanding, she saw him not just as the electrifying performer, but as the kind man who had taught her a quiet, invaluable lesson. The incident, once a source of deep shame, had become a pivotal turning point, shaping her into a more empathetic, more understanding person. In the end, The story wasn't about a fan overstepping. It was about a king who chose compassion over anger, and in doing so offered a lesson in grace that echoed through a young woman's life and through the quiet annals of his own legendary kindness. It was a testament to the quiet power of an understanding heart, proving that even in the brightest spotlight, the truest character shines through in moments of unexpected humanity.